you guys for joining me today. How's it going?
Great day.
Awesome. Really excited for our topic today. I think that it's one that's really important because so many contact centers today are struggling with hiring. Right, this labor strategy, hiring, retaining agents. There's a lot of reasons why that's happening, and we can get into that certainly. But there's kind of two key ways that I'm noticing customers are solving this challenge. Right, you've got business process outsourcing, so going out and hiring a BPO to outsource some or maybe even all interactions in some cases, and you've got automation. Right, so all these interactions that used to require a human, maybe they don't anymore. Maybe there's a way to automate some of that and make it easier. My first question to you, and either one of you can jump in here, is that, what's the right answer? Is it one or the other? Is it BPO? Is it automation? Is there kind of a blend of the two? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's always the yes, no, or both. And answer, I think here is both. I think a lot of people have a knee-jerk reaction that they just have to do one thing or the other. But really, you need to have a strategy for pretty much anything that has to do with your business. But people get busy and they just say, "Oh, I have this problem," and the perceived problem is I don't have enough people, and then they just might outsource it. And they don't know if they're outsourcing it properly. They don't know if they're picking the right one. They don't know all those different types of things. Instead of stepping back and saying, "I need a strategy to handle interactions with my customer and my labor." Right, and that can be solved in two different ways: BPO and automation, and those coexist together. It's not an either or. Again, you may outsource all of your BPO, you may outsource some, you may implement automation for some interactions, and then grow into other interactions. But you have to have a plan that goes through there. So I think they coexist. I don't know, Mike, what you think.
No, I totally agree with that. Depending on, I think there's more of this either or this or play for those that have a stake in one of the camps, right? Like they want to do more with BPO. They're pushing that as, hey, you need more people and, empathy and human interactions. This is important. And then the others saying, you can automate everything. Look at how great the tech is. And the reality is it's both of those for sure. And this is one of those things where we see a lot of dissatisfaction with customers because they think of this as, not a big cohesive strategy. It's just sort of, I got a problem, I got to fix it. And I would say historically, typically that's been, let me just get a BPO and get them plugged in and handle more of these interactions.
Yeah, that's good. So effectively, you're kind of seeing, the symptom is I've got this labor strategy, and a lot of people go with the easy button, as people like to do, and just say, let's just outsource some of this and make everyone's lives easier and be done with it.
Yeah, and at the end, what happens is there's a lot of people that might have dissatisfaction over that decision. So they say, my handle times are up, my hold times are up, SLAs are down. Oh man, I must need to throw even more people at it, right?
Yeah.
And more and more, and it just perpetuates the challenge where, because labor is the number one cost by far of any contact center, whether it's virtual contact centers, all in one brick and mortar, it doesn't matter where they are. People and supporting those people is what costs the most money. And historically, people threw people at it, right? And part of that actually was due to, if you look at automation 10 years ago, there's a lot of people in the contact center fields that have been in the field for 10, 20 years who've been burned on automation, right? I call it, the automation today is not your grandpa's automation, right? Where you call in, the strategy was just automate everything with technology that wasn't ready for really automating everything, and everybody had dissatisfaction. In today's world, customers are used to talking to machines, right? Who talks to Siri or Alexa or Google? People are used to that, so it's no longer like I want to talk to a human for every single interaction. People are willing to talk to it, and they want to talk to it because they want to just get answers quickly. And that's where people are leveraging in the automation strategy is doing it right versus an all-in-one. It's kind of like selecting where can automation be a balance of cost and value to the end user. So the end user is not just always zeroing out saying, I want to talk to somebody. They're actually going through and getting the information they want.
Interesting. What would you, and maybe Mike, this is a question for you. What would you say are kind of some of the key signs or early indicators that an organization might need to look at an automation strategy? Maybe there's someone who hasn't decided whether they're going to, outsource or automate or do both. Maybe there's someone who's already, outsourcing a little bit. Are there any kind of, indicators that tell a contact center leader or business leader, hey, yeah, you should probably look at automating some of this stuff?
Yeah, I would say it's the majority of companies that have contact centers that have some pretty significant percentage of their customer interactions that are that's oversized, meaning 30% or 50% are this type of interaction, right? It's checking status on an order or updating, getting an update on something, right? There's these constant repeatable actions, and for many organizations, there's a lot of that. Some organizations don't have good data on it, so that's where you have to start. You have to have data to know, right? Like what are people reaching out about? If you don't have that, you don't know where do you automate? What can you automate? There are some companies that almost everything's very custom, and there's we work with customers that have this, right? It needs to be very human centric, a high degree of empathy, and things like this. So there are some companies that this is maybe not a play for them right now, but it's usually the ones that have this repeated action, these interactions that are happening all the time. And sometimes companies have good data on it, sometimes they don't. If they've got good data, then we focus on one or two of those use cases of what's that taking for, what does that look like? What is the specific ask? Is it repeatable enough where we can build a framework to address that through technology? And if we do that, what's the impact to customers? Can they receive help faster for these types? Right? Can they come in and self-serve, get this knowledge? And then what's the impact that's on the customer side? What's the impact on the business side, right? Does that mean we don't have to scale by adding 10 more agents before the end of this year? As agents drop off, we don't have to backfill those roles for a period of time. So we can now finally get some economies of scale when it comes to handling interactions. Those are kind of those things to look for. So it starts really with, I'd say that, where's those hot button, like people are always asking about these types of things. Let's find those, and then we can look for good ways to solve them.
Yeah, to add to that a little bit, there are, even when you have those kind of, I call it menial tasks, right, where someone's calling in for something fairly basic, that's where the combination of the BPO and automation strategy comes in play, because it's rare that you're going to be able to contain 100% of the interaction, even in that use case. We go into with our clients, we sit down and we look at the use cases, we look at how their systems are set up, their processes, and we say, we expect a 55%, let's say, containment rate, or a 65%. So you're still going to have 35% or 45% of the calls that still get through for that type of interaction, potentially. Other ones you may be able to contain 90, but that's part of the path. But when it does go through, that's where you say, for that type of interaction, does it need to go to a badged, domestic-based employee to just answer the basic question, or is that where you can then implement that kind of cohesion there, which is put those to a BPO, right? The ones that do get through go to BPO, and that's where you can really get the double whammy, right? So when it does go through, it's a lower cost of transaction. When it gets contained, it's a lower cost of transaction. One other thing just to add that Mike said, is that kind of, we call it the phase 2 for some of these customers that are looking at automation. It is a process, right? It's not just a one-time event. This is automation and BPO thought and labor strategy is a process. But some of the interactions that are complex, you can still layer automation in front that handles the simple part of that complex transaction. So It could be some validation. It could be authentication, right? We have some clients that are looking at deploying automation for authentication purposes, because what they have internally, it takes 90 seconds to authenticate a user, let's say, using a human before the agent can say, okay, now how can I help you, Adam? That could be done in 20 seconds, and then the call gets passed through the agent. It's already been validated. They get notified, green light, they're validated, and they just go into their process. So they've now cut out over a minute, and if they're doing tens and hundreds of thousands of transactions a month, that's a significant cost savings, right? Because the cost per transaction is much lower. So this is where, people have to have a strategy, and you kind of put them all together.
Yeah,
Great.
that's good. That's good, Adam. I'm glad you brought up cost, because sounds cutting edge, sounds great. Also, sounds like it could be expensive. So, how do you
That's part about it.
how do you think about kind of what are some key factors maybe to think about when you think about an ROI on automation tech specifically? I know BPO is a little more straightforward. It's, hey, you're saving money on the labor directly, and there are other things that go into that. But touch on automation, I think, because that's a little more complex and maybe not as clear.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things you need to do first, and this is what we do, we run a financial model and say, does this make sense, right? And in order to run a financial model, we need data, right, from the customer around their costs. And there's different costs. It's not just what's your cost for telco or your cost for your people. You got to look at what is it, because you get down to what's your cost per minute to handle this thing with all your little costs in there, cost of your platform, your telco, your hold time, your cost of customer dissatisfaction, all those type of things. You look at it and say, it costs me $1, right? And then you look at this, what the costs are for the automation systems. Automation systems are typically some type of a license-based or transaction-based cost. What we're finding is it's somewhere between 45 and 60% lower cost per transactional minute, right? That you have when the machine or the automation can do what it's supposed to do, right? The key is finding the right use cases that actually make it do what it's supposed to do versus only containing 5% of the calls. Then you end up paying for that and the cost of the human as well. And then the other piece of that is to combat that. There are, you look and say, well, when it does get through, maybe we can go to an outsourcer, to a BPO for those type of transactions. So maybe it costs me, 90 cents a minute, internally. If I went to a BPO, maybe it cost me 50 cents a minute. But when it goes through the automation, it's only 22 cents a minute, right? And then you start looking at that triangulation, saying, well, which are the ones that we can move into these different buckets? And that's where you get your optimum labor strategy and use it properly. Mike, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think that's all spot on. One thing I'd add, that starting with your comment at the beginning, which is, staffing for contact center is a challenge right now. Some of this is forcing, which I think is a good thing around how people think about the ROI on this too, because you don't have the luxury in some cases of being able to staff all the roles you want to. I mean, we've talked to a lot of contact center leaders that can't. So, and they're worried about these, especially if they've got some great agents, great knowledge, they take good care of the customers. If they can take some of this more menial, mundane kind of stuff off of those agents, you're reducing the load on that existing base of agents that they want to maintain as well. So you're getting a double whammy here too of retention, satisfaction. You don't have an agent who's just completely burned out, low on empathy when they finally need to talk to somebody because they're dealing with all these mundane things. So you can get some really good force multipliers, I think, from the staffing side of this ROI to look at. And this is why when we talk about this is an ROI conversation. It's not a TCO. Most people are not thinking about, what's this cost? I mean, if you're thinking of it that way, you're missing all of the impacts of what this can do for the business. So we described this and it took a couple minutes to do so. There's a lot of things you could really factor in. The big part kind of underlying our approach to this too is let's be really conservative. I think a lot of times everyone paints this beautiful tech picture of how it's going to do this, and it's going to borrow words from Adam, it's going to walk your dog, it's going to drive the kids to school, it's going to do all these wonderful things, Well, let's be conservative and let's be realistic. And you know what? Let's have containment rates that are conservative, and if they overperform, great. But let's have a model that supports some pretty conservative assumptions. The other thing you'll learn with this tech is a lot of this is iterative. So you continue to tweak and build and develop to really drive further benefit and ROI on it. So it's not kind of, I'll always quote Ron Popeil, love that, you don't set and forget your automation technology, right? Like there's more to it than that usually.
No, and that's huge. I mean, you really hit on like so many good points there, but the whole piece of not thinking this thing's going to solve world hunger is huge, because people have expectations that, I'm going to put automation and everything's going to be automated. And a lot of times, really the vendors come in and are a little bit optimistic, right? And I think you need to, if you can't pass the mustard test on a realistic thing, you probably shouldn't do it, or you're not thinking about it correctly. And I think, and the other thing, Mike, that you brought up, which is important, is all those other business reasons of why maybe outsourcing is the right way to go. Mm-hmm. We're seeing stats where people are having like 95% turnover in training classes. Wow. It used to be significantly lower than that. It was always turnover in contact centers are pretty high in training. People go through training and then they get their pay during training and they might move to another. But it's gotten crazier, right? They can't get it. And it typically costs about $7,500 to get someone through a training class. And so they have to spend $7,500 and the person, only 5 or 10 or 20% of the people are actually going to get on the phone. And then the tenure of people staying on the phone used to be around 9 months. Now it's like 3 months.
Oh, wow.
So you look at that and say, maybe an outsourcer, they do it for a living. They find people, right? They vet people. They have training classes. They have all the things. They've built that for scale, right? And that's another reason to look at that. So it is cost, hard cost. There's typically some savings there. But there's also, as Mike said, the full ROI cost around training and onboarding costs and loss of productivity and all those types of pieces that we will put into the model that are real. Interesting.
And yeah, I imagine there's probably a lot of BPOs out there, right? A lot of options. If you decide that that's I guess best, or if that's urgent for you and you need to go that route. But I'm curious, what are some key things that you should look for when identifying who the right BPO provider is for you? Because, there's so many things to consider. How do you kind of, I guess, measure who might be a good fit for your organization?
It's a big question, right? So we could probably have a whole podcast on that. Just kidding. But, there's a lot of factors depending on what the customer is. But before I hit on that, go back to what you said. A lot of people, when they have BPO needs, they may say, oh my God, I need an outsourced need. And they may just Google, or maybe not Google, use Microsoft or whoever to search and find just a name that pops up in their search and just run out and get it. Or maybe from the past, they worked at a company that used somebody. And that's the extent of their vetting, right? And they just go out there and say, I need bodies. And then they go out there and then they bring the bodies. And that's not the right way to go about looking for BPO. I mean, there are specialty companies out there. Maybe you need some insurance. You need special licensing. Maybe you need nursing, special licensing. Maybe there's a language. Most of your customers are in a certain area and they want to talk to certain accents or things like that. So it's all about understanding the customer's business. And we have a checklist that and I think customers should go through is language, geography, licensing, proven track record, focus on my vertical. You go through these things and then because there's hundreds, literally, I think there's like 600 BPOs in the market. I might be even understating that, but don't hold me to that. And so it's hard, right? So you need to really think through it. It's not just looking at the first one that floats up on your search results. You really need to do your diligence and vetting when finding one.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think if you think about too, this is literally going to be a business partner of yours that's going to be talking with one of a company's most valuable assets, customers, right? So, I understand why people make decisions hastily, right? They have things if, we need to do it. We've got deadlines, but to Adam's point, being methodical and thoughtful about this overall, what level of automation in BPO, but then, okay, we need some BPO, what type and where? And what are the drivers? What's the success criteria for finding that? That could be a full-time job to do that, right? For somebody, especially if you just don't know, right? Like, how do you know if this is just a great salesperson or if this is actually this company's core competency? The good news, right? The plug for us, I guess, is that's what we do, right? We've got people that do this, and we've got good established track records with BPOs that perform well and compete and work really hard for customers' businesses and do a good job of delivering on the outcomes that the company relies on them for. yeah, I think to add that, to Adam's point, it's references, right? It's vertical specializations, it's cost and location and language. There's all these kinds of things that need to be weighed into it. Even that would get you to a list of a couple dozen.
Yeah.
So, how do you narrow that down? I mean, we can help companies narrow that down, which I think is the easy button in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's also kind of that, I call it that balance of you have cost and then you have performance. And then you're trying to find that optimal balance that works well for what you're outsourcing for, right? Some companies, depending on where they are, they say, you know what, I could sacrifice a little bit of customer service. Maybe my SLAs aren't as good and maybe my CSATs are not as great, but the economics work out for me right now for where I am in my business evolution because I need to spend money elsewhere to grow my product, let's say, or grow my marketing. So there's these different levels, and that's what you have to go through is like, where are you as a company? And because there's premium cost doesn't mean premium value, right? But you're kind of looking at that balance, and that's what you really need to think about when you're looking for that kind of stuff.
Interesting. Yeah. One of the common, I guess, objections or fears, however we want to state it, when someone's considering a BPO relationship is maybe it's lack of control, but I think really more so it's lack of continuity, right? Like, man, these people work somewhere else, whether they're here, whether they're offshore, whether they're near shore. How do we know that they're going to represent us well, right, at the end of the day? And, that lower CSAT, if it gets too low, can be, can really hurt you long term. And so, is there anything that a BPO can do to kind of, or that a customer should look for in a BPO to kind of help them, with that continuity, make sure that customer experience doesn't change too much?
I'll give you my view on a couple of these things because if you go back in time, again, I keep going back in time because I'm old, and to like BPOs typically would provide the people, the reporting, the technology, everything to the enterprise customer. And part of that was due to just the technology back in the day. It was on premise. It was more complex to, didn't have cloud, right? Now cloud tech, and so customers lost visibility. They're like, I'm trusting that the BPO is doing a good job. They're kind of giving me reports. They're trying to kind of doing these things. I think they're doing okay, but then I'm hearing from my customer the opposite, but my reports say I'm doing great. And, and you kind of had a lot of that in the past, right? But now with the cloud-based technology, these enterprises could extend their technology to 1, 2, 5, 10 BPOs. They have real-time visibility into how each BPO is performing. They can change flow volumes. They can say, hey, this one BPO is struggling. They can't fill the seats, right? They haven't been able to get through the training classes. They're not giving good, our CSATs are not good there. I'm going to pull back volume and move that volume to these other ones. And we're going to work with the BPO to figure out what can we do to get you to a place that you can get more volume again. And that's really what the new cloud-based technology allows you to do versus in the past, you would have maybe all these BPOs providing their technology, and then you're trying to match up reporting and how are we really doing. So that's been a big change that's enabled the enterprise to really have a grasp and treat a BPO as if they're just another location of theirs or another home worker of theirs that they have access to and they have visibility to and can run performance metrics on. That's been a huge change.
Yeah, I think the key to add to that is it adds transparency now, right? Which was from a customer perspective, that's great, right? A company looking for this, that's the piece. So the tech helps facilitate this, and then I think a BPO partner that allows for or embraces that mentality as well is one of the key things you're going to look for. You can have somebody then that is willing to be part of that, be a part of your platform, right? And I think there's some BPOs that really take that seriously and have dedicated teams, and they've got you go visit some of these BPOs and sites, and they've got all the banners and the swag, and I mean they're part of the team, right? And that's part of that team's culture is the extension of the company they're providing support and services for, and that's all going to vary based on But part of the due diligence process is probing into those to understand. But fortunately, to Adam's point, the tech really has changed the game to allow that level of transparency, where you don't have to just trust; you can trust but verify. Some of the stuff.
Sure. So not your grandpa's automation. It sounds like not your grandpa's outsourcing either.
Different game. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. We talked about a lot on this call so far, and I guess the last question is going to be very similar to the first question, but with everything we've talked about in mind, what's the biggest factor when you're because we've talked about, hey, the answer isn't either or, it's both, but from each of your perspectives, and might be the same, might be different, what do you think is the biggest factor that would sway you to do one versus the other first, or just do them both at the same time in terms of your BPO and your automation initiatives when thinking about your overall labor strategy?
I hate to say it, the answer is going to be kind of dull, but it depends. You really need to get in and understand where the customer is in their evolution, what's their ability to digest change, what's their current technology situation, what's their experience working with BPOs, what type of roles do they have? Again, what are their financial situation? Are they looking to cut costs because they want to spend money on marketing and drive more products? What are they trying to do? Based upon that picture that we document for our customers, we then come up with a suggestion. Say, look, we're working with a customer right now. They initially hired us I want to replace my buy, right? And that's what they hired us to do. And after our diligence, we said, that's not what you need to do. That's not your problem, right? Your problem is high hold times or SLAs. You can't fill your seats. And so what we ended up doing was layer, and then we dissected their call type and said, a huge percentage of your calls are in here, and it's taking this long to do each one of those calls. So automation was the triage. So we started there with automation, right? And another customer may have started at a different point. Wow, yeah, let's go get you a BPO as fast as possible, right? And let's go do that. So it really depends on where the customer is in their evolution. They really need to take the time to sit down and have a strategy, lay out that picture for you. So that's kind of my long way of saying it depends on the customer situation. Mike, I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
You went exactly where I was going to go. The only thing I would add is because of that, both things can be successful, right? It can be very successful right now to plug in a BPO if that's the need and that's what's the right fit. It can be just as successful to plug in the automation component first. And so we have customers and case studies that prove out both of those. So it does depend, which is kind of the soft, easy answer, but it's absolutely true. And yeah, to Adam's point, we've got engagements right now that are both of those paths, right? And if the customer was pushing or we were pushing a different path, the outcome would not be near successful, because it's just it's the wrong order for them. So they're not mature, or it's just a mismatch with what the problem that we're trying to solve for.
And the customer needs to be honest, right? They need to be honest with where they are and themselves, and be willing to take a look in the mirror and say, this is really where I am. So we need to solve this way, versus thinking or hoping that they really need this to go over here or do this over here. You have to really have a data-driven process and say, look, here's the facts, right? And the facts, let's all buy into those facts to make a decision versus an emotional, I think I need to go do this. And that's where people get into trouble a lot.
Yeah. It would be, think about it strategically, think about the overall picture and not, just what happened that afternoon or, last week or what have you. And dare I say, hire a company that's going to help you figure that out.
Totally.
And if not, do it yourself, but take the steps, right? I mean, that's what I say. Customers, sometimes we talk to customers and we're not the right fit for them. And we're not. And that's okay. But they need to be thinking strategically. And if they need help doing that, there's companies like us, and we hope they choose us to help you along that path.
Awesome. Well, guys, thanks so much. This is really, really good information. I'm sure people there will get some nuggets out of it. I know I sure did. And I hear you guys both talk all the time. So it was a pleasure. Thank you for joining me, and congrats. This is the first multi-person podcast we've done. So you guys will be forever etched in the Hall of Fame or the Hall of Infamy, just depending on how this goes.
Yeah. All right.
Thanks for having us. Thanks, Austin.
See you guys.
Thanks.